Hello everyone, welcome to the Adkup Show. Today we are diving into a wild mix of history, geopolitics and trade. Think about Monroe Doctrine. If you have observed Trump's latest moves, he is talking about capturing Panama Canal and changing the name of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. He's also trying to take over Greenland and Canada. So the question is Donald Trump trying to revive Monroe Doctrine in an aggressive way? In this video, we will try to explore and understand various dimensions of it. So without wasting time, let's get started. Alright, let's kick things by going back into history for some time in order to understand the Monroe Doctrine. So picture this, it's 1823 and President James Monroe is like, hey Europe, hands off the Americas. It was a bold move for young US trying to flex its muscle in a world full of colonial heavyweights. The idea was very straightforward. No new European colonies in the Western Hemisphere. No meddling with independent nations here. And in return, the US wouldn't mess with Europe's business. It sounds very simple, right? Well, not quite. It's evolved a ton over 200 years. And lately, folks are asking if Donald Trump is bringing it back with a MAGA twist. But before we get there, let's unpack what this doctrine is all about. Back in 1823, Latin America was shaking off Spain and Portugal, and Europe's big dogs, like the Holy Alliance, were itching to swoop back in. Monroe, with his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, pulling the strings, said big no. The US couldn't really enforce it then because the US Navy was very tiny. Fast forward and it got teeth. By 1890s, the US was bullying Britain out of Venezuela disputes. And in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was like, we will intervene if you can't keep it together. The US boots in Haiti and Dominican Republic was less about Europe and more about power. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Monroe Doctrine was all over it. Point was to keep outsiders out and US on top. So the question is Trump reviving this old school playbook? Since he took office again on January 20, 2025, he's been making noise. Let's break it down. First, he signed an executive order on February 10th, renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. New maps, new holidays, all in just 2 weeks. He's calling it a nod to America's legacy. Then there is Panama. He's threatening to take back the canal, claiming Panama is letting China creep in. However, there's zero evidence of Chinese troops there, as per Panama's president, Molino. But here's the catch. Panama's population is around 4.5 million, and out of which more than 200,000 are Chinese national. If you take citizenship into consideration, then more than 17% of population of Panama is of Chinese origin. Not just this, there is an active engagement by a Chinese government in Panama. China bought 2/3 of Panama's copper production. That's 5% of Panama's GDP. There are many other evidences which shows that Panama does have massive Chinese influence. So Monroe 2.0? Well, maybe it's got that keep rivals out flavor, but it's also peak Trump. Big loud ad in your face. So here's the deal. Trump's Panama threats echo Roosevelt's vibe. He's mad about China's economic influence, like Hutchison Ports running terminals there since 1997. Actually, Hutchison Ports is a Hong Kong-based company, but Hong Kong is no longer independent. And according to the US, it's a security risk. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio been in Panama pushing hard, but no invasion yet. Well, Panama doesn't even have its own military. Now, coming to renaming of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, that's pure symbolism. Mexico and Cuba aren't playing along. It's less about enforcing a doctrine and more about rallying the base. The U.S. knows very well that Latin America has many options at its disposal. Now let's zoom out. Latin America is not just a pawn in this game, it's also a trade powerhouse. So the question is, who's it vibing with more, the US or China? And the answer is, it's complicated. Let's dig into the numbers, starting with China, because that relationship's being wild. China and Latin America were barely a thing in 2000. they had only $12 billion in trade. But by 2023, the trade crossed $480 billion. That's a 40 times jump. And why did this jump happen? Well, China is a hungry country. It's currently the most industrious nation. Soybeans from Brazil, copper from Chile, lithium from Argentina. These stuffs are in big demand in China, and these stuffs are also very important to build cities and EVs. LAC, that is Latin America and Caribbean, exported $243 billion to China in 2023, up by 4.9% from 2022. They exported mainly beef, oil, and minerals. So the exports of LAC were mostly agricultural products and resources. China sent back $445 billion, down by 2.4%, mostly phone, machineries, and cars. So the question is, who are the big players in this trade? Well, it's Brazil with $104 billion in exports, Chile with $47 billion of exports, and Peru with $35 billion of exports. And here's the surprise. The Canque mega port in Peru was opened in November 2024 by Xi Jinping, a $3.5 billion game changer linking Shanghai to South America. And all these things are not just on papers, but are happening in real time between Latin America and China. China is not just buying, it's also building. 22 LAC countries are in Belt and Road Initiative. Roads, ports, dams, you name it. Trade hit $451 billion in 2021, and projections say $700 billion by 2035. But here's the catch. LAC sends raw stuff and gets finished goods. Brazil's shipping soybean, China sending TVs is classic north-south trade. It's great for growth but shaky for balance. Plus, debt can't be ignored. Argentina owes $17 billion and Bolivia $1.5 billion of China. Some call it a trap, others say it's just business. Either way, China is deep in South America's orbit. Now let's talk about the US side. In 2023, trade with Latin America hit $916 billion, way more than China's $489 billion. US exported $566 billion of machinery, tech, oil, etc., and imported $350 billion worth of coffee, copper, and cars from Mexico. And that's where the real catch is. Mexico is the star here. $460 billion with USA thanks to USMCA. But if you remove Mexico, then it's $456 billion. Now it's still ahead of China, but it's closer. US is at $300 billion. China is at $450 billion. Big names. Mexico, $460 billion. Brazil, $80 billion. Chile, $34 billion. Service sector adds another $100 billion. Tourism and finance are giving US an edge. But the reality is that this gap is getting narrower every year, with China trying to surpass the US. So who is winning? Well, the region-wide, the US is ahead, $916 billion to $489 billion. Mexico's the anchor with $460 billion of trade with the US. They got only $115 billion of trade with China. But in South America, China has got a good edge of $450 billion to $300 billion. Brazil trade more with China, Chile too. Colombia stick with the US basically. It's a split. North and Central America wide with the US, but South America is leaning east towards China. And Trump is trying to shake things up with his 60% tariffs, which is threatening on Chinese goods via Peru. This could tilt LAC back towards the US, but it's a gamble and it could backfire. Now let's compare the vibes. US trade grew 80% from 2011 to 2023, but China's 40-fold rise since 2000 is just insane. US has proximity like USMCA, FTAs with Chile, Peru, Colombia, and some mixed history. China's got momentum with its Belt and Road Initiative. 8 LAC presidents visiting China in 2023, which shows that LAC has big expectations from China. US offers stability, China offers cash and speed, but both have downsides. LAC is stuck exporting commodities either ways, copper to China, oil to the US, and diversification is a pipe dream. US FDI was $25 billion in 2011. China's loan hit $140 billion since 2005. Different games, but same challenges. To be fair, the biggest demand in LSE is currently of infrastructure and some factories. Technically, the US can't provide all this because the US itself is a deindustrialized country now. Alright, now let's tie this together. The Monroe Doctrine was about keeping Europe out, but now it's China in the crosshair. Trump's Gulf rename and Panama's threat screams America first, but can he deliver? Well, Panama's not budging and invading is a long shot. Those 1977 treaties aren't paperweights. Trade-wise, the US still runs the show with $916 billion. But China is closing fast, especially in South America. LSE is in the middle, juggling two giants. China's $489 billion and climbing. US could hit $1 trillion by 2030 if nearshoring pops off. Here's the kicker. LSE's trade openness, 47% of GDP lags other regions. Infrastructure is weak, which the US can't provide. Intra-regional trade is only at 20%. China is building Peru-Brazil railway, whereas US plans with America's partnership are looking slow, and the real-world threats are not only the thing which is required. Countries need to build win-win partnerships. Trump's tariffs might disrupt China's flow, but LSE could get caught in the crossfire. China might overtake if the growth holds. US could pull ahead if Trump's moves stick. So what's the conclusion of all this? Well, Latin America's trade more with the US today with $916 billion, beating $489 billion. But China is the one to watch, especially down south. Trump's channeling Monroe vibe, but it's more show than strategy so far, and LAC's playing both sides. And honestly, it's a smart hustle. World has changed a lot. We're not living in the 19th century. It's not a colonial period. Countries which can deliver real growth will naturally have more influence. We can't say who's gonna win, but one thing is for sure. Reviving Monroe Doctrine looks almost impossible, but there is still a chance. So what do you think? The US keeps the crown or China takes it? Or there will be some sort of a middle ground where both the US and China will agree on sphere of influence? Drop your thoughts below, smash that like button if you learned something, and subscribe for more deep dives. Until next time, stay curious. Peace out.